On this episode of our Crowdcreate Mastermind series, we've brought together the leaders, legends, and most innovative minds in space and aerospace to talk about what keeps them up at night. Listen to what the minds behind SpaceX, NASA missions, and space investors see as the biggest business opportunities in the final frontier. While many of us are celebrating momentous breakthroughs in reusable rockets and, ironically, landing a spaceship on Earth, others are thinking even further into the future around governance, sustainability, and space debris. If you're curious or looking to invest into aerospace, this Crowdcreate Mastermind will put you at the cutting edge of where this industry is going.
Welcome to the Crowdcreate Aerospace Mastermind. So the purpose of this mastermind is really to bring together the community, share your insights, and leverage what we call the wisdom of the crowds. You've all been invited because you're a thought leader in the aerospace industry. We have a good mix of investors, attorneys, of influencers, of startups, and just executives from different businesses. And so really the format of these masterminds is to bring attention to your work, build some awesome connections, and give value to others. So we ask that everybody goes around, just share a 1 minute introduction on who you are, what you're working on, and what are you most excited about, and what are some of the big opportunities in the aerospace industry. We will be using the chat to put links to everybody's bio so you can meet each other. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, I'll kick it off. But again, just to mention, everybody has 1 minute to introduce themselves, so please keep it brief. And if you have any questions, use the raise your hand feature. So my name is Ivan. I'm the co-founder here at Crowdcreate. We connect thought leaders, investors, and business executives to grow the network. And what am I excited about? We're working on launching these masterminds across multiple industries, and not just aerospace, but gaming, blockchain, real estate, startups. And we're launching these private communities where you can join and engage with the speakers here on this call. I'm also excited about the spinoff 2021, which NASA is constantly putting out, but there's just a lot of innovation on there that people should take a look at.
Thanks, Ivan. And this event is brought to us by Hudson Space Systems. They sponsor the event, a phenomenal group of entrepreneurs. And Nathan, would love for you to go next and introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Jeffrey. My name's Nathan. I'm a co-founder at Hudson Space Systems. I do our design and management.
And my name is Monica. I'm also a co-founder at Hudson Space, and I head our propulsive development here. And at Hudson Space, we're focusing on bringing microgravity research to more people, making it not only accessible, but easy, hoping to spread the wealth of innovation across a larger group of people instead of just focusing on traditional access like NASA and the government, really.
Yeah, and we're excited to have a robust conversation with all of you guys about your experience in the aerospace and new space industry.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Michael, would love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Michael Mealing. I'm one of the general partners at Starbridge Venture Capital. We're a space-focused venture fund. Been around since 2017. We are primarily looking at companies that are enabling new space applications, but also are enabling or enable terrestrial markets as well. And the thing that we're most excited about in the industry is the slowly emerging in-space manufacturing sector. Much of the industry right now historically has been around Earth observation and communications, but between companies like Space Tango, Space Forge out of the UK, and some of the capabilities from Axiom Space in terms of platforms, we do think that in-space manufacturing is kind of the new emerging sector.
Thanks, Michael. Gabe, would love for you to introduce yourself next.
Hello, my name is Gabe Dominicello. I'm the co-founder of Umbra. We are a space intelligence company that collects Earth observation data. Our first spacecraft is a synthetic aperture radar satellite, which is a novel phenomenology that allows you to see through clouds. And we have a novel antenna and radar that allows us to see down to 6 inches or approximately 15 centimeters.
Thanks, Gabe. Adam, would love for you to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. Adam Harris from Orbit Fab. Orbit Fab was created to refuel satellites in orbit. So we're taking this idea of helping the on-orbit servicing companies and really changing the way satellites are built by not just refueling before they launch, but having the ability to maneuver and refuel in orbit. So happy to be part of the discussion, and I'd love to hear kind of other ideas about how on-orbit servicing is really changing the way we do this business.
Thanks, Adam. And you're also previously with SpaceX, is that correct?
I was in charge of government business development as we got into the ELV business, and then told people that we were going to land rockets on the Earth, and everybody laughed at me. So it was a lot of fun.
Congratulations on what you've built.
Yeah, really great time.
Rick, would love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rick Tumlinson. I guess I was lucky enough to be around and help kick off what we call the New Space Revolution a couple of days ago, and built up a few companies, signed up the first guy to fly on the space station, led the team, took over the Russian space station a few years ago for a little while, a few other projects, and then a couple of years ago decided to cash in my scars and start a venture capital company to help some of the brilliant minds that are out there starting space entrepreneurial companies match up with the people who are coming in from the outside who may not know their way around. And so Space Fund is focused essentially on what I call frontier tech, the sort of technologies that will either support or be enabled by the activities you see with folks like Jeff and Elon. So we're really excited, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Rick. And Kyle, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
A pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on. I feel like I'm a little out of my league, but I'm glad to be here because I'm here to learn. But I was a performing illusionist for the last decade, but luckily I dabbled in the stock market for a little while for the last several years while I was performing, because leading into this pandemic, I lost everything, man. When you watch all those magician, probably the least, what do they call, essential service workers out there, right? But luckily, I'm diligent, and I've been investing in the market for several years with a lot of success, focusing highly into emerging sector stocks. I found a lot of success in the cannabis industry early, psychedelic industry, renewable sector. I really love new sectors in the market that I think are just broadly overlooked. And the space sector, in my opinion, is definitely being one of those sectors, even though we're crashing today, which is kind of funny to anybody that actually pays attention to some of these companies that are out there, which there are only a handful. So I'm fairly confident and excited to learn more about the industry. Most of my focus right now is on satellite infrastructure because obviously it's the path quickest to profitability, but we also want hype, something these companies are doing that's different, that's innovative. And luckily, a lot of them are going to Mars, Venus, the moon and beyond. So I feel like I'm on the edge of my seat knowing that I can own a piece of this and pick the brains of people like yourself and further learn about how this industry is going to evolve. But I think now is a great time for investors to be paying attention because it's happening. I'm sure you're all aware it's happening.
Thanks, Kyle. We're all about diversity of thinking, so have people from all over it. Graham, would love for you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, I really appreciate it. So my name's Graham Green. I spent the bulk of my career actually working in Michelin star restaurants in New York and California, and then spent a bit of time abroad also in Northern England and Copenhagen. But most recently, the project I'm working on is I'm the Chief Product Officer at Mission Space Food. And so we're the first commercial company looking at food and nutrition in space. The goal of the company being that the innovations that are required to meet the space food constraints apply directly to Earth. And so there's a history of food products from energy bars to modern baby formula, first innovated for the space food systems that ended up sparking $10 or $20 billion markets for each of those. So I'm really excited to talk to everyone today.
Great, Graham. And Kelly, would love for you to go next.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. We are focused on space communications, and most people, when they talk about space communications and satellites these days, are talking about all the robust systems that are closer to the Earth, GEO, MEO, LEO. There are all kinds of amazing things happening. But when you get out to the moon and beyond, which is where we're focused, there's a very little happening, and there is a huge demand coming. So we are essentially stringing satellites like cell phone towers through the solar system. And our company is called Aquarian Space. And we're excited to to be the first commercial, essentially utility company providing communications at the moon and beyond.
Thanks, Callie. And Charles, would love for you to go next.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate the invitation for being on the panel with such esteemed colleagues and people in the aerospace and space industry. I've had my firm for nearly 20 years. Coming October, it'll be 20 years. We've always been focused on technology. For the largest part of that, it's been internet related technology, both on the litigation and the business side, the transactional side. And over the last 4 years, we expanded into the space industry. And so that's where my focus has been primarily over the last several years, particularly representing new businesses within the new space industry, but also doing policy work. And as far as the excitement aspect of the question, I think it's a great time for all new businesses and entrepreneurs to expand into this area and to grow. Our firm is positioned and happy to help them continue in that regard. And I think it's also an opportunity for everybody to come together and work on developing regulation and policy that continues to make space available for all different sectors. And we've seen that most recently with the interaction between SpaceX and other industry key players and the astronomy community in developing guidelines for mitigating the adverse effects of satellites on that aspect of science. So thanks again. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Charles. And Armand, would love for you to introduce yourself.
My name's Armand Musey. I'm the president and founder of Summit Ridge Group. I joke that we do valuation work before transactions for due diligence. When transactions go bad, it's litigation support. And when things go really bad, it's for restructuring, bankruptcy. But I've been in the industry since the late 1990s, starting as an equity research analyst on Wall Street. And so I've seen an enormous change in the industry. I think that's what's the most exciting right now, is that it's gone from a very sort of sleepy industry with a very conservative aerospace type mentality to a much more dynamic industry just over the last couple of years, with an influx of younger people, new ideas, and people taking a lot more risk and doing a lot of iterative iteration of different project plans that we haven't seen before. And so the explosion of new ideas in the industry is just a huge change from what it was 10 years ago even.
Thanks, Armand. And we'll unpack that later because I would love to hear your insights. David, we'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks for the invitation. It's a delight to be here. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Geeks Without Frontiers. We're a global nonprofit organization scattered around the planet. And our team is traditionally focused on trying to leverage relatively immediately scalable technologies. We're technology neutral. So it's really, what's the best mousetrap to get communications and database solutions into those who have either nothing or something that is currently insufficient. We really cut our teeth on things like open source regulatory policy frameworks for governments, on fiber and satellite and so on, how to leverage them with exponential effect. We saw an opening for a mesh Wi-Fi standard, a need. So we wrote one. That's the 802.11s, which is now hundreds of millions of people are leveraging that tool. And we're doing various things in refugee camps and disasters and so on and so forth. And then COVID hit. And in the past year, it has been really bad and wonderful all at the same time, because the tools that are available, including satellite, not least, both for data and communications, the need for ubiquitous wide area coverage and Earth observation and SAR-based data sets and so forth. The importance of that in the eyes of government and of the user community has escalated beyond all recognition. So there's a tremendous opportunity that we see that we did not see before, and excited to be here to share views with everyone on this distinguished panel.
Thank you, David. And thank you for what you do. I was actually chatting with you before, and I really respect what you're trying to create. So thank you, everybody, for your introductions. We're going to jump into the discussion portion. Again, if everybody can take use and make use of the hand raising feature, so that way we can keep the communication going. The first topic, so we touched upon this at the very beginning of the call, but you can tell when the NASA logo is now found on AirPod cases to T-shirts to sweaters. We have reached a point where there's so much excitement around aerospace and space, and it's showing up on news everywhere. So why is this why is this happening? And also I want to tie it into, why is this such an investable opportunity as well? So we've got a lot of topics to unpack, but yeah, if anybody would like to jump in and raise their hand, and we'll call on you first. Michael, you're up.
Sure. So we get this question a lot, is why is this all of a sudden something that I'm seeing in the news all the time, and why is it investable? And it goes back to something that Rick and I remember back in 2004, something called the Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act, that really clarified the ability of commercial companies to act in the space, to launch vehicles, fly things, and clarified the regulatory environment around the FAA, the FCC, who did what and how, and especially around human space flight. But the problem was it took this long, and companies like SpaceX and coming in and lowering the launch cost to really get to the point where all of the technology curves, whether it's the cost of building a satellite, the mass of the satellite, or the expense of the launch, to get to the point where new business models became viable. And that really started about 4 to 5 years ago, when you started seeing new launch companies come on the market like Rocket Lab and Relativity. And so, for example, we created Starbridge in 2017. I think Rick and Megan were around the same time. And it was really, that was the point where it became investable from a venture capital standpoint. And now with the SPACs and what's going on in the public markets, it's becoming something that public market investors can invest in.
If anybody would like to add, Rick.
Hello. Yeah, as I guess one of the other resident old timers of New Space, whatever you want to call that, although I'm in complete denial of my age, I'm a leap year guy, so I just went through that this weekend. This revolution, as we call it, really it started in the very late 80s and rolled all the way through. And a lot of this, there is a documentary film coming out really soon called The High Frontier about Jerry O'Neill, who's really the godfather of a lot of what you're seeing, where he basically suggested to a generation that you should take the tools of free enterprise, space resources, and go out and expand humanity into space. And for example, there was a young guy that had a dream of having a book club who hooked up with Jerry's organization, a guy named Bezos, actually gave his graduation speech about the fact essentially that he was going to make money and then come back and open the frontier. And so organizations like the Space Frontier Foundation, groups, people like Mike Mealing, fought for this is one of those overnight successes that took 30 years, and it's breaking now, and it's getting ready to break even more. If you watched the little flight yesterday of the Starship, that baby is learning to walk, and finally actually stood up yesterday, landed on its tail. When we hit reusability, 100% reusability, and rapid transportation, that's the railroad to space. So we're in this moment. It's exciting now, but hold on to your straps, because it's about to get really crazy up there.
I'm ready for that railroad to space. Gabe, you're next.
So, I mean, I think that something that we should touch on is technology, right? you look at access to space becoming incredibly affordable with Elon Musk, who's brought down the cost of a rocket from, $1 billion to under 100 million. And then on top of that, you've got what's going to happen in the future. Are we going to be laying down cables to like get internet? Are we going to be like, I don't know, getting cell phones like from a cell phone tower, or is that all going to come from space? Like, look at what is happening in the architecture of infrastructure. It's moving higher and higher. And I think that we'll continue to see that. And so we really are in a frontier of a completely new revolution.
All right, David.
Yes, I agree with everything that was just said by the past two speakers. And I like 2 speakers ago that I heard the term really crazy. And also in most recent comments, I heard reference to everything shifting to higher altitude in space. And I just wanted to flag, not to be a downer, let me put a positive spin on this question. We are a signatory to the Space Safety Coalition guidance on how to prevent or mitigate the introduction of further orbital debris into LEO, MEO, and GEO orbits, where they don't even know how much trash is floating around in there. The estimates range from 50 to 200 million pieces. There is no enforceable mechanism at the moment to require anyone putting assets into orbits that would prevent further introduction. There is already, by some accounts, the Kessler syndrome in effect, where orbital debris is running into more orbital debris, which creates more orbital debris in a cascade effect. So here's the happy spin on all this. And my question for the group at large, is there the financial, a financial interest evident to pay for some means by which the further introduction of debris into the orbits will cease, or at least be reduced to a functional level? And or finally, is there a financial motivation that can be the heart of a solution to this, what you might call wicked problem?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. We'll definitely talk about that next. Thank you, David. Kyle, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I want to actually chime in because David made a really good point. I want to talk about what excites retail investors in this space, what got me into it, because I've seen this space multiple times. I just wouldn't enter it until as of recently for a few factors. But I think David points out a fact that I primarily look at every new emerging sector, which is what are the problems? What are the issues that investors at some point or someone's going to have to pay to fix? And actually, that's probably one of the biggest problems with space. It's mentioned the most because there's a compound effect where over time, this debris will break down enough that it'll cover pretty much the entire around the planet, making it extremely risky to get into further or late, obviously higher orbits, right? But we can touch on that because I'd love to hear what everyone else has to say. Anybody that actually has more intelligence than I do, obviously, in the space. But from a retail side of investing, when you guys are talking about how exciting this is, what I don't think people are recognizing is how public this is going to become. Because everyone mentions SpaceX. Obviously, they're the ones that are kind of frontiering the hype that we are all experiencing right now. But again, there's so many companies like yourself that are being overlooked. I mean, we're talking, they're going to be putting selfie satellites up. There's a company privately doing that. And the delivery company that's doing it, I believe, is Momentous. And it's incredible when you look at some of these companies and how much they have reduced the cost of some of these space infrastructures that are going to need to be utilized like right now, which is obviously satellite related. Momentous is claiming they've lowered the cost of late stage satellite delivery from 10 million to 1 million, a 90% reduction in cost, which is absurd. And then again, you're looking at these reusable, scalable rockets that the bigger the rocket can get, the more value we can pack inside of it. And again, I'm more as a retail investor trying to focus on the combination of profitability and hype, because at the end of the day, every company has to be fun. If it's not fun, if it can't find a way to attract an audience who's really going to care, how are they going to get investment dollars? So I like the fact that space isn't just a business about satellites and Wi-Fi. It's also a business like, hey, we can put like Honeywell that's got a greenhouse up on a satellite right now. The fact that, Lockheed Martin landed, or very well helped land Perseverance on Mars, right? Like it's incredible that how a lot of these companies are only a reach away, but it's really hard to navigate now. But the thing that stepped me over the edge was the fact that we're getting proof of concept. Like you guys were saying that like it's been 20 years, 30 years in production to get to this point where we finally say, hey, look, we built this thing, we've proven it out. Now we're getting to the point of investor dollars and scale, which I think is brilliant. I think it's beautiful. And like I said, I think it's being largely overlooked, because I wouldn't buy these companies even a year ago. But as of today, I mean, Momentus claims, well, obviously in 2019, they proved out their technology, or so they've claimed. And then you're looking at, again, some of the SPACs that were mentioned there. I mean, we saw Virgin come through a SPAC that's just starting to prove out their engine concepts and things of that nature, which are still finicky at best. But I'll leave it there from the retail side, because that's where I see most of the excitement going to be, is those combination of companies that can do both, not just, make great technology, but also find a way to make it fun. Because it's complicated and dangerous, but if it, Elon makes it fun, right? Like everyone said, the starships are like sitting in like, if you could think of like an Apple product, that's how the astronauts were describing the shuttle, right? So I mean, like that's all we're talking about is SpaceX. So I mean,
Good.
Here we are, like it's proof of concept.
Yes, sir. And Charles, I'd love to hear from you. You have an international perspective on this, and love to hear from you.
I in particular, I mean, I love everything that everybody's saying, and Kyle, I'd love to have a further conversation on some of the businesses and so forth that you mentioned. But I particularly want to respond to David's comment on the orbital debris, or space debris, as the European sector refers to it. And we've talked about, Rick has mentioned how, this really has been like 20, 30 years. And over the last few years, the new space has really reached the excitement. But with the same perspective, the policy efforts to try to address orbital or space debris are about as long. I mean, from the US side, that began back in 1993 with the White House starting to look at it. From the international side, that was the IADC and UNUSA from the United Nations. And really, from the US perspective, only until like the last couple of years have we started to, through the FCC, discuss and really implement regulations that are going to have some teeth in terms of trying to mitigate the orbital debris issue. One of the issues that comes to mind, though, is, and the reason that I mentioned like SpaceX before with respect to its efforts in dealing with the astronomical issues. Now, clearly Starlink is the one that prompted that in May of 2019, when everybody said, wait a second, how can we have these streaking across the sky? But its focus on technology and building DarkSat and now VisorSat to address and mitigate those concerns are fantastic, but not all of these companies are going to have the financial capacity to just do R&D and address the issue. So we need to get to a position where other companies, SpaceX, the smaller companies, everybody's sharing that kind of technology, because as David said, the orbital debris issue is not going away. It is significant. And we need to be in a position to where we still can use different orbital sectors. So that's part of my excitement, though. I don't think it's a downer. I think it also can be an opportunity for all of the players to come together and work toward that solution. But we have to do so as a community and not isolation. And Ivan, you mentioned the international context again. I think the other issue that comes into play a lot is some of you may know the ITAR and EAR issues, with respect to the transfer of information and technology outside the United States to our international counterparts. There's got to be an examination of that too, because for international cooperation to really take hold across the sciences, there needs to be some kind of reassessment of those particular issues. But I'm excited just by this panel and the thought leaders here that are today talking about these issues, that we're on the right path. So thanks everybody for, again, including me and contributing your thoughts.
Thanks, Charles. You have a lot of wisdom to share, so thank you. I know several of you are raising your hands for this topic, but I do want to move on, but it's really relevant and actually a great transition. So we're talking about a lot of things in orbit, from debris, but also I want to focus on what are those business opportunities, that we're seeing, because we're talking about why is it so popular and why is it so investable. I do want to switch gears and just talk about those business opportunities that we're seeing right now. And Graham, I know you particularly are a good example. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, well, I think just to kind of touch on that last, just really quickly on the last question brought up by David, to me, as someone who certainly is not as knowledgeable as the rest of you about the debris in low Earth orbit, to me, that's a question that's almost emblematic of the larger issue, which is while we're trying to explore really at the threshold of scientific innovation, how do we not bring the problems that exist with the way that humanity interacts with Earth into those next phases of exploration? Because to me, that issue of debris in low Earth orbit sounds eerily similar to, my time working in restaurants trying to source fish that no longer exist, partially because of plastic pollution in the ocean. But I think to be a bit more optimistic and to answer your question, Ivan, is that I'm sure all of us are on the same page that innovation that happens in space can drastically affect the way that people live on Earth. And so I think the business opportunities are huge. I know Mission Space Food, the company that I represent, has a different approach in that we're certainly not trying to bring, for instance, satellite internet to everyone on Earth, but we believe that a lot of this consumer attention that exists in space can be leveraged to positively impact the way people eat on Earth, both through material innovations in the way that food can be stored and nutrients can be stored, but also just in the way that you can convince people to change their eating habits to incorporate better practices.
Thanks, Graham. Love to hear from you, Armand.
So in terms of opportunities, there's a couple obvious ones. The biggest one is the internet, right? So we see SpaceX, we see OneWeb, we see Project Kuiper. Those are going to be huge opportunities for people. There's also a lot of money going into Earth observation and remote sensing. And there's all kinds of ideas of how to make that work and how markets can develop from that. We've been waiting for that to happen for really kind of 20 years. Every time I go to one of these conferences, I see new ideas about remote sensing and Earth observation, and then they ultimately don't really develop that quickly. We're still waiting for the killer app there. But if you look at just the massive increase in terms of satellite launches, satellite manufacturing, the amount of things going into space and the number of ideas, it's clear that we're sort of like 1999 maybe in the internet era, where there's a lot of new ideas, but we really haven't settled in many areas on what the business plans are going to be, what the killer apps are going to be, how are people going to use it. That we're still kind of very immature in the industry, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's a really exciting time. But I would say that of so many of the ideas we see out there in 5 years, many of them won't be there. And some of the ones maybe we didn't think were great ideas will actually be, astoundingly large. So I don't mean that as negative, but I'm trying to add a little bit of, sage advice from an elder.
Thank you, Armand. Let's hear from you, Michael. What are your thoughts on that? Oh, you're muted.
I'm a little bit contrarian, not really contrarian, but as a venture fund, we look at things that are a little bit different timeline than some of the other people in the industry that are looking past that. We're investing now in looking at things that are exiting in 6 to 8 years. Anything that has timelines that are beyond our 10-year fund horizon, we look at, we encourage, we think about, we help from a policy standpoint. And a lot of the things that we see in the industry right now are beyond that. So we really are riffing on a lot of the same things that we've been doing since the 1960s. It's primarily Earth observation and communications. But what we're seeing is innovative companies with new technologies to be able to do that. And that's where a lot of the innovation that's happening right now. For example, Umbra with their synthetic aperture radar is a good example. And those are the opportunities right now. It's the new technologies that are disrupting the way things were done in an industry that was dominated by government that was very much interested in keeping things the same as opposed to tearing things down and building new things every couple of years the way we do in the rest of the economy. So where we're encouraged, to go back to something that Armand just said, is there are notional business models that are out there that we can't figure out how they close yet. And Rick will probably jump in on this one. For example, we can't figure out what the business models are for anything beyond geo at the moment, with some very specific limitations. We think we know what that killer app is, but that killer app is not being deployed right now. And we think that's people in space, and people in space that are willing to pay their own way to go for various reasons. So a lot of the things that people are excited about in the space industry, you have to be very careful about to find, who is the customer? That's the number one question that we ask. In a lot of cases, the customer is another space company, and some of these supply chains are very circular. And so that's one of the things, the opportunities are for those killer apps to come on soon. But right now, if you're an investor in this space, you really have to look at who the customers are and the timelines that you're going to need to get to those customers. I think it's one of the challenges, but one of the opportunities if you know how to look for those signals.
Those customers will be defining who are going to be those brands that stick around afterwards too. So
yeah, but it's more who the final customer is. So if you're mining water on the moon to sell to a propellant company, and that propellant company is then selling it to the company that's going to move the water from the moon to the propellant depot, that's a circular economy. There's no customer. We're looking for who wants to put something on the moon that's going to justify that infrastructure. And right now, except for NASA, we don't see them.
David, I think you'd have a great perspective on this, and we'll move to Kelly afterwards.
Yeah. First of all, welcome aboard, Moriba. I was channeling you earlier in this webinar by introducing the subject of orbital debris. In terms of opportunity, I just want to say, most of the work that we're doing at Geeks Without Frontiers is focused down on the planet's surface, and we're going where most others are not going because it's more difficult. But what I want to say that's so exciting is what we see right now that's happening. This is right now, it's happening, is an incredible oversupply of satellite capacity, which is really great for end users. At the same time, really exciting complementary technologies and capabilities are being brought to bear through cloud, IoT, blockchain, artificial intelligence, and the list goes on. And what we're seeing now is this is higher in the tree. Most of the for-profits are going traditionally after the low-hanging fruit. But what we're now beginning to see is that we're not alone out in the field trying to get to these marginalized communities, disenfranchised, disaster affected, low income, whatever it is. Right now, today, we have partners who are doing $1.50 ARPU for profit as a business strategy. This is rolling out, not pilots, not proof of concept. These are business plans. A lot of it's under the radar. These are smaller companies who are going where the big players are not. And there's no press releases on this, and it's happening. We have seen more public examples of this through space-based players like Viasat, for example, who's rolled out Wi-Fi with high-throughput satellite backhaul for 3,000 villages in rural Mexico, reaching 1 million low-income individuals. That's a for-profit business line for Viasat. So these sorts of things. And then we get into data analytics is really starting to come around and synthesize and render the data sets from an unprecedented number of Earth observation and SAR-based data so that you can monetize it And that's going to drive everything. It's like Armand was saying, we totally agree. Yeah, they're really making it up right now on business cases that will close. And I'm here to say they're beginning to close in amazing ways.
Wow, that's a story in itself. Kelly, I'd love to hear from you, and we'll move on to, after Kelly, I want to hear an introduction from Moriba. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah. So we're in this really, I mean, there's so much here, right? There's so much about what the opportunities are business-wise in space. And we're in this really interesting moment. I'm sorry, I forgot who likened it to 1999, right before the internet boom. That seems true. And what's happening right now is unprecedented, specifically in lunar and deep space. I mean, same with Earth local space. We call it Earth local, geo and closer. There are incredible things happening there. But at the moon and beyond right now, there are resources going there that have never been done before. And on top of that, in general, the customers for that right now are governments, right? It's defense and it's civil. It's NASA and ESA. And that's real, but NASA's doing something really cool right now, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the CLIPS program, which is essentially funding commercial contractors to go and do things that NASA used to do themselves. They're actually funding the commercial market in such a way that then that commercial market is actually creating plans for after. So what's happening is that in the next 10 years, these commercial companies are going to be able to actually go do their own things, in addition to continuing to serve NASA and serve other international space agencies. So as that happens, we need an infrastructure to meet them. So if you think about when people, first settled, let's say the US, that's where I'm at right now. They needed railroads, they needed telephones, right? It's the same thing happening right now as we look at the moon, as we look at Venus, as we look at Mars. We need the communication systems in place. We need transportation in place. Data is always a really interesting market. So this infrastructure is coming to the time where it actually is needed, not only from the space agencies, not only from defense, which both actually needed at this point, but the commercial market is actually going to increase that demand. And then in addition to that, there are other opportunities. I know a startup here locally in Colorado that's working on recycling waste in space, speaking of orbital debris, and looking at how do we actually take this and recycle this metal and then actually create spacecraft parts, maybe eventually spacecraft in space out of the debris that's out there. And then of course, as this all lands, as these space agencies continue to actually be successful beyond geo, as the commercial entities start to be successful even more beyond geo, then there's the whole question of course, asteroid mining and space mining, but also humans and habitat. How do we not just have really great healthy food to send with astronauts, which is incredible, but also how do we grow our food in space? How do we communicate as humans across the timeline? There are so many, I think, opportunities at this moment, and it's just the moment where we can start to see some of them landing. So those are a few that I'm tracking right now.
Love it. Thanks, Kelly. Moriba, I'd love to hear from you. Introduce yourself. I know you're a legend of itself.
Oh, please. Look, I'm happy to be here. Sorry I couldn't be here earlier. I teach a class at this time, which conflicts, and as much as I love all of you, my students are more important. Yeah, my name is Moriba Ja. I'm an associate professor of aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics at the University of Texas at Austin, where I lead a transdisciplinary research program in space safety, security, and sustainability. Really, I'm trying to quantify, assess, and predict the behavior of human-made objects or anthropogenic objects in space. I've enjoyed what I've heard so far. I recognize some folks in the room, so hello to everybody. And really, in terms of the sort of infrastructure and trying to find who's the paying customer, given your line of sight, return on investment, and all this other stuff. Look, I think that it really boils down to making a good argument for space safety and sustainability. Right now, we don't have sustainability metrics, in space, meaning that there's no way to really quantify risk of anything. You know, it's he said, she said, different people have different numbers. We do have this thing from the IADC that says, oh, you know, collision probability. When are those real? When are those not so real? People are getting warnings all the time. It's like Chicken Little, sky is falling. There's always a collision that's about to happen. It's like, that's no good. So the thing is, really what that means, when space is a complex system, in that you have a number of participants making decisions in the absence of knowing the decision-making processes of other people. You have very nonlinear causal relationships. Small things can have huge consequences. We don't understand all the interdependencies. So because a lot of this stuff seems random, that should be the first red flag. When behavior seems to be random, I'm a huge skeptic of intrinsic randomness. I think like randomness is mostly BS. I think it's mostly us ignorant. We just don't know. And so we like to blanket our ignorance and call it randomness because it's easy to do that. So when things appear to be random, that should be a red flag that you have no clue of what's going on. And it's not because it's not understandable. You just haven't gotten there yet. And so I think that when I look at things like the Outer Space Treaty, Article 6, that says nation states have the responsibility to authorize and provide continuing supervision of all space activities of non-state actors. To me, that means, hey, if Acme Incorporated in the United States wants to put up a gazillion satellites in LEO and automate all their maneuvers, the US government has continuing supervision, meaning it knows what those things are doing all the time. And I can tell you that if you interpret it that way, there's not a single government on the planet that has continuing supervision, all this stuff. I love the idea of the recycling. I'm the first person to say we should minimize single-use satellites, just like minimizing single-use plastics, minimize single-use satellites, make these things recyclable, form-fitting to other type of stuff. But in the business development of rendezvous and proxops and these sorts of things, it's just a matter of when, not if. When Acme Incorporated is going to service Das Vidania LLC, and then 2 days later, there's going to be some dispute saying, hey, this is what they did to me. My stuff's not working quite as well. Okay, where's the evidence? Where does that get reconciled? Who knows who did what to whom when? We're so focused on the collisions. I can tell you that the space security issues that we face are completely eclipsed in information requirements as compared to this collision stuff that seems to be the Eye of Sauron's on collision, not on this other stuff to like make sure that people are protected in the businesses and the things that they're doing up there. We have MEV2 rendezvousing with Intelsat. Guess what? When these things get to within, I don't know, a kilometer from each other, nobody has a clue except the people doing the stuff. Like, where are these satellites located? We can't even distinguish one thing from the other. We get the identities confused. We have an identity crisis in space. These are the things that need to get solved and with sustainability metrics and that sort of stuff, so that there can be this marketplace. And I think business can be open. You know, space insurance companies can now start charging premiums for liability and stuff like that on orbit. Like all these things that don't exist now start going away if we can like establish carbon footprint analog in space, space traffic footprint, carrying capacity for orbits, these sorts of things.
Reba,
So anyway,
that's a strong call to action. Wow, I really respect that. And thank you for sharing. Rick, it seems like you have you're really agreeing to a lot of those points. I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, Mariba and I have passionate agreements and passionate disagreements, but that's because we're brothers in the cause. The thing is, I want to go back to one thing. You were talking about opportunities because this is about a business. This is a business thing, and one of the areas that we are not investing in, for example, is rockets. I just want to put that out there. I think Michael agrees as well. We have too many rockets. My thesis is that's because we have too many boys and boys like rockets, but that's a whole separate argument. Regarding debris, we have to take care. We have to protect Sandra Bullock, man, and it is critical, right? And I think there's 3 levels there, real quick. Not to stay. This show has ended up being around debris a lot, but really that is interesting, and we can talk about that. But there is the the opportunity that hasn't been created yet for companies that want to clean up existing debris. Then there's the opportunity that has to be created to stop new debris, which for me is something like, for example, the right of salvage needs to be put into space, because it's the big objects that are the real problem, because they end up making lots of little objects when they hit each other. So if we could create a right of salvage to where, because right now nation states are responsible for the entire lifetime, allegedly, of the existence of their vehicles. So there is that. The right of salvage could open up a new business opportunity. You could have a commercial solution. But then the key to all of this, a lot of this is we're transitioning from an aerospace industrial model that is about spending lots of money, getting more money from the government, spending more money, and it's all about throwaways so that you get paid to replace and all of that. That is in juxtaposition with what I call the frontier model, which is bring costs down, reusability, recycling, replacement, repurpose, and resources. And if we can start to inculcate a philosophy into this new industry as we move out that is actually focused on those 5 things, not only will we create a whole new set of opportunities and interactions it's an overused word, but in the space ecosystem, we'll actually be modeling a new set of behaviors that we need to be actually expressing down here on the planet while we're engaging in enterprise in space. The idea of reusing stuff, recycling stuff, of working together, the green, there's no bigger environmentalist than somebody floating in a habitat in space above the Earth, rebreathing their own air and re-drinking their own recycled urine. This person is very aware of how to take care of systems. And so we have a lot of potential for modeling and moving, not just as we're doing enterprise, but as we're moving out into the frontier, showing how we can do enterprise in a way that is both beneficial and positive.
Thank you, Rick. And that modeling, actually a really good point I want to bring up, Hudson Space Systems. We'd love to hear from you how specifically you're doing this for startups and helping them create these business opportunities. I think you're muted.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
then we'll
Ivan.
go to Charles afterwards.
So yeah, that's a really interesting point. One of the things that we are aiming to do with our company is providing access to current companies and enable future companies to access microgravity research and manufacturing to develop these business models for themselves. There's a whole range of opportunity, proven and unproven, across the range of STEM technology. So for example, there are all of these sorry guys, I stepped on the mute button there. Like preparing technologies to expand human exploration, we need a proving ground. We need accessible ways to develop these technologies. So the business model we're developing allows companies to access that.
And it's part of our vision that people can work on these innovations without having to add extra satellite pollution into the LEO mix, right? So if you can go up and do some experimentation or manufacturing and bring it back down within, let's say, like 1 gravitational cycle, you don't have to worry about adding to that pollution. Because, I mean, as much as we love to think about what space and the industry could be in the future, say it's a model of how we can, move forward and recycle and make it green from the start. That's not, unfortunately, going to happen just of our own volition and all of us willing it into existence. Unfortunately, things like that don't always happen unless there's like a financial means that people are driving towards, or either a governing body hoping for that to happen. I think unless people are going into the industry thinking about that from the start with good faith, or if there's a regulatory body, we have to be designing for that now ahead of time. So design with the option for extra debris isn't even there for customers.
That's a good point. We are in our final 5 minutes of our mastermind. If anybody from the panelists or even the attendees have a question to ask, feel free to type it into the Q&A section, and it's open and everybody can answer it there. If there's any topics or anything you want to discuss, please share it there. Love to hear from Charles.
Really quick, I just wanted to jump on 2 points that Moraba had mentioned, and related to that is one, liability, I think, and also what Hudson Space Systems has just said. I think that whether the company is small, medium, or large, they really need to be thinking about the design and incorporating the design for safety and mitigation now. They also, from a legal perspective, even if there aren't so many all the insurance products out there yet, they need to be thinking about that liability aspect and protecting themselves now. The time to wait is, they don't have the time to wait, and they need particularly the small companies need to be focused and paying attention to the regulatory process and looking at the proposed regulations, commenting when they have the opportunity to do so. Because one of the proposals in the new FCC regulations, one is to make sure that you're indemnifying the United States by anything that you do in space. And 2 is the possible requirement of a bond. And depending on what that bond metric happens to be, that could be significantly prohibitive for small businesses. So bottom line, think about design, think about insurance and liability protection now, and pay attention to the regulatory process.
Those are very important points, and everybody here is on the innovation side, but also think about the liability and the insurance and the sustainability. Armand, love to hear from you, and we'll go to Michael and David. Hopefully we can get everyone in before the time's up.
Sure, I agree with a lot of the things that have been said, particularly about space debris, but I think we have to recognize that the strength of the industry is also its weakness. We've had this incredible evolution that's allowed prices to come down, new entrants to come in. Companies that are with very small capitalizations have now been able to access space. But that means you have companies with small capitalizations accessing space. They don't have necessarily the resources to have all kinds of redundancies on their satellites. They don't have the resources to afford expensive bonds. They don't have the resources to go up and clean up a mess that they put up there. It also means that you're going to have people launching satellites from more and more countries, not just a couple of countries in the world that have space access, but it's going to be really a global situation. And if the rules tighten up in the US, people will launch from another country. So it's a very difficult situation to bring under control. It's nice to have ideas, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of small companies who want to get up into space, don't have a lot of money, and it's going to take, I think, some really creative new ideas to solve this.
Thanks, Armand. Michael, love to hear from you. You're muted.
Yep. So I was going to respond to one of the Q&A questions as well, but I do want to go back to a little bit to the debris problem slightly. I do not think it's a hair on fire emergency. There have been some calls in some circles for a launch moratorium, which is, I think, overkill. Much of what's going on is in LEO, which are in a lot of cases are self-cleaning orbits to a certain degree. For example, one of the causes of significant amounts of debris was the Indian ASAT test. And much of that debris has since deorbited itself because of the altitude. There's still, according to Moraba, about 100 pieces that are still left up there. So nature helps, but it is not a complete solution. But figuring out how to make that into a business is difficult. Garbage trucks are not usually venture investable businesses. But one of the questions was, Q&A questions was the role of settlement and a lens from which to look at what a lot of the companies in this sector are doing and what even venture funds like ourselves are looking at in the future. We do think that people living in space and either temporarily or permanently leaving the Earth to go do things elsewhere in large numbers is where you get into the justification for a lot of things that a lot of more longer term companies are getting into. So that's exactly what Elon's plan is. And as a fan of that kind of an idea that both I think Rick and I share, that is something that you're going to see a lot of companies start looking at as longer term business models that get into generational, multi-generational kind of wealth building and wealth transfer.
Thank you, Michael. And last final answer from David.
Yes. I'm not going to talk anymore about orbital debris, I promise. What I wanted to do for my closing comment is to share the fact that we have 2 astronauts on our board of directors who served on the International Space Station, and they have imparted to us this relatively, actually a decreasingly unique perspective that comes from space about the interconnectedness of major systems on the Earth's surface. And I'm talking about weather, oceans, terrestrial realities, and so on. And what we're seeing is strategies increasingly are part of the mix on Earth that take account of that interconnectedness. They're bigger picture strategies which ultimately cry out for space-based tools and other assets. So again, we're technology neutral, but space is unusually valuable for us in what we do, and more broadly for everybody we're doing it with. So we see huge potential on business plans and on holistic strategies that address the Earth's interconnectedness.
Thanks for that, David. And thank you everyone for attending. We're all here to support each other and we appreciate all of your insights. Thank you again to Hudson Space Systems for sponsoring this event. We do want to keep the conversation going. We have a private Slack group that we will invite all of you to, and we'll also send you a recording of this so you can share it with all your followers, and hopefully we can help get the word out about orbital debris and all the problems that we can solve in the world. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next Mastermind.